What's up, everybody? Welcome to part 2 of our data table series. In this video, we're going to take a look at our user-defined table type, write our stored procedure, and test it out using .NET Core. Okay, so I've got SQL Server Management Studio open here, and we're in our demo database. And the first thing we're going to need to do is create a user-defined table type. So here under Programmability, and we go to Types, and we go down to User-Defined Table Type. And I'm just going to open this up for you. You can right-click and say New User-Defined Table Type. And we're already in our demo database, but if you were going to use this template, then you would just go and say use demo, and then you can say use type, give it a name, and we're going to call it a name table type as table. And then with this primary key, we're not going to need. Now we can just enter our columns. So if you remember, in our name table, we had 3 columns. So yeah, we had ID, which was an integer, and then we had first and last name, and varchar 50. So let's just go ahead. What we need to do is we're pretty much going to mirror that table. So all I need to do is enter my columns that I want in my table type. So ID, int, and since it is our primary key, it cannot be null, so we're going to put not null. And first name, and varchar 50, and that can be null, and last name, and that can also be null. And let me just add the 0 in up here. Okay, so now all we have to do, essentially I'm just showing it to you this way because you could just go in and type this. It's very simple. It's create type, give it a name as table, enter your parameters. And I know we said we didn't need a primary key, but what the ID is referencing in our table is a primary key, so we do need to match that here. So, and I do try to match the types along with my original table. So now I'm just going to go ahead and click on execute. Okay, and now we have our type. So I'll come down here and we can go ahead and refresh this. And now we have our table type. So if we go and take a look at it again, we see our type right here. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to need to do is create a stored procedure that is going to accept a parameter that is of the type of the table type that we just created. So let's take a look at how we can go about doing that. So once again, we're in Programmability. I want to go to Stored Procedures, right-click, and just say, click on New Stored Procedure. If you want, you can get rid of all this commented code. And okay, so the only parameter that we're going to need, we also need to give it a name. So I'm going to go ahead and just call this stored procedure insert names, because we are going to be inserting a bunch of them at once, a collection of names. So what we need here is a parameter that's going to be of our newly created type. So I'm going to say something like names as table type. And one other thing we need to do is make it a read-only parameter. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is just set up our insert statements. So what I want to do is insert each name in our data table. So I'm going to say something like insert into name. And remember, we're only going to use first name and last name because ID is auto-generated. That's an identity column. So now what we need to do is we select first name and last name from our table. And that's all we need to do for our stored procedures. So I'm just going to hit execute and command executed successfully. I'm going to do a Control-Shift-R, Control-R, Control-Shift-R. Sometimes it just doesn't go away, but we can take a look at, I'm talking about the red squiggly lines. We got rid of most of them, but if you want to go back in and see that our stored procedure is still there. So there's our stored procedure. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is show you how to call this from .NET Core. Okay, so let's go back into Visual Studio. We're back in our names controller where we left off. Remember yesterday or in our last video that we created our data helper class and our method to convert to a data table. So where this just accepts a generic list and returns a data table. So we have our data table in place right now, and we're going to be using ADO.NET. So what I'm going to need to do is using SQL connection, and then I'm going to go ahead and control dot, and it's going to, as we see, install system.data.SQL client, and I'm just going to say find and install latest version. And I'm just going to call that cn equals new SQL connection. And we are going to need a connection string. So in order for us to access our connection string, we're going to have to add it to our app settings.json file, and then we're going to have to install a couple of NuGet packages. So if you're familiar with one of my other videos in setting up a .NET Core API, I show you how to do all of that using Configuration Builder. So let me go ahead and do that, and we will be right back. Okay, we're back. So essentially what we need to do when we need to access our Configuration Builder outside of this program.cs, we need to install a couple of dependencies using NuGet. So what I needed, actually three of them. So Microsoft extensions, configuration, configuration.file extensions, and configuration.json. So, and also we have to set up our connection string in our app settings.json. So there's our connection string. And then finally in our controller, I added this code right here. So I'm just creating an instance of our configuration builder. So builder equals new configuration builder. I'm attaching my JSON file, my app settings.json, and then I'm creating a config object, and that allows me to get access to my connection string. So now we will be able to pass that connection string to our SQL connection. So now I also need a string for my stored procedure name. So our stored procedure name was called insert names. And I also want to open my connection. Now I'm going to use SQL command and pass it my stored procedure name and my connection. And stored procedure command type. Now I have to add a SQL parameter. And the first property is going to be parameter name, which is my table type name. Okay, so my parameter name on our stored procedure, which is actually the collection that we're passing into it. So, and then also my DB type is SQL DB type structured. And finally, my value is going to be my data table right here. Okay, let me just put in that semicolon. And okay, so I've got my parameter. Now I need to add my parameter to the parameters collection. And then I need to call command.execute non-query. Okay, hit Control F5. That brings up our Swagger page. Now, when I hit names, so what this should do now is it should populate our names table. So let me just open up a new query window here. Select from our name table, I should say, and we still have nothing in there. So now let me go ahead and click this get, try it out, execute, and we have our 3 records here. And let's go back into SQL. We re-execute that command, and there are our records. So it did work. If you like this video, please go ahead and smash the like button and subscribe, and I will see you next time.